Okay, so let's tie together a little bit of what we've been looking at. My factor theorem says, all right, if I substitute a value into the polynomial and I get 0, then x minus a is a factor. So that's what we were just thinking about the remainder theorem. If I wanted to work out, if I wanted to divide something by x minus 2, I then worked out what p of 2 was, okay? And if that's equal to 0, I get 0 remainder. And if I divide anything and get 0 left over, it means it's a factor. 10 divided by 2 is 5. There's no remainder, so 2 and 5 are both factors. So that's what we're looking at. So we tend to go the other way. So if x minus a is a factor, well then p of a has to equal 0. So, or in a general form, if ax plus b is a factor of x, then that must be true. Negative b on a has to be 0. So I guess the way in which we're going to do that is working with this substitution, all right? This question here says show that x plus a is a factor. You could argue, do the division, and then if you get 0 remainder, what must be a factor? And that's true enough. But if it's a factor, p of negative 1 should be 0. So p of negative 1 is equal to negative 1 cubed minus 4 times negative 1 squared plus negative 1 plus 6. Negative 1 minus 4 minus 1 plus 6 is equal to 0. Therefore, x plus 1, so 1, is a factor. Now, then it says find the other factors. Well, if I know one factor, that should divide into the polynomial evenly, okay? So in other words, I now need to work out x cubed minus 4x squared plus x plus 6 divided by x plus 1. So that's where I can do my division, my repeated factor, or my synthetic division. So coefficients of 1, negative 4, 1, and 6. I'm going to divide by negative 1, so I take the negative, sorry, I'm dividing by x plus 1, so I take the negative of that. Coefficient of x there is 1, so I don't have to worry about any divisions. Bring the 1 down, negative 1 times 1 is negative 1. Add them together, multiply by negative 1, I get 5. Add them together, multiply by negative 1, I get negative 6. Add them together, I get 0, and that's the magic number. There's my 0 remainder. So that means I get x squared minus 5x plus 6 is the other factor alongside of x plus 1. So there's my expression factorised. Now, x squared minus 5x plus 6 I can factorise. So that's equal to x plus 1. What's that? Minus 3 minus 2, x minus 3, x minus 2. So that's our fully factored form. And in fact, they're my linear factors because they're all to the power of x to the power of 1. So that's how it all ties in together, boys. Okay, we've got a cubic. I want to try and reduce it so I can factorise it, which means I've got to find a factor of it. To find the factor, I've got to substitute a number into there that gives me 0. All right? So you can look at here at part B. See, in part A, we were told we had x plus 1. Okay? Instead, what we need to do now is try and find a number to substitute in. All right? And we'll come down here later to look at what we call the rational root theorem, but the numbers that we're going to try are going to be factors of the coefficient of x cubed times the coefficient of the last term. So in reality, 1 times 6 is 6. So I'm going to try plus or minus 2, plus or minus 1, plus or minus 3, plus or minus 6. Okay? So given the numbers are close in size to each other, have a look at that. 1 and 6 is 7, -2 and -5 is 7. I think 1 or +1 will work. So let's try P of 1, and that's equal to 1 minus 2 minus 5 plus 6, which is equal to 0. So I happen to get it guess correct straight away. If I'd have put -1 in there, I'd have got -1 minus 2 plus 5 plus 6, which does not equal 0. Therefore, x plus 1 is not a factor. Okay, and I would have to try another one. But we've got P of 1 is a solution, so that means I'm going to divide by x minus 1. So if I'm going to divide by x minus 1, I'm going to put a +1 out the front. I've got a 1, -2, -5, and 6. So nothing to divide by, it's a 1x. So bring the 1 down. 1 times 1 is 1. Add them together, I get -1. 1 times -1 is -1. Add them together, I get -6. 1 times -6 is -6. Add them together, I get 0. Again, I've got 0, so I'm confident I haven't made a mistake. So let's tie it together. My factors are, well, there's my x minus 1 here. So I get x minus 1, and then I've got x squared minus x minus 6 from these numbers, which is equal to x minus 1. So minus x minus 6, what's that going to be? Minus 3 plus 2. X minus 3, x plus 2.